You are live, follow you.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear
Dina?
me? Okay, good. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Diane Sainzoga, the Chief of UNCTAD's Regional Office for Africa. We are based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And it's a pleasure to host this webinar today. On behalf of my colleagues from UNCTAD, I would really like to wish you a very warm welcome. In fact, this year in June, UNCTAD will be celebrating its 60th anniversary, and it's a very good opportunity for us to reflect on some critical issues affecting the global trading system and specifically affecting Africa. In this regard, our today webinar will be discussing on challenges faced by the global shipping ecosystem. And today we will be together with government officials, with international organizations, with freight forwarders associations, with shipper associations, with port managers, among many other participants. And really thank you, all of you, for joining this session. So our webinar has three main objectives. Number one, we want to inform stakeholders on the current trends as well as development so that you can plan accordingly. Number two, our webinar aimed at analyzing the impact of shipping disruptions, such as like how those disruptions are affecting activities in general, how is it affecting the continent in general, and we will be able to discuss on some challenges such as the increase of transport costs, the cost of insurance, the inflationary pressure, as well as environmental related issues. Our third objective actually is to think about some possible solutions as well as proposing some recommendations. So despite this crisis, there are emerging opportunities for Africa ports to leverage on increased traffic. And that will stimulate the trade in general and boost economic growth. So African countries need to invest in implementing trade facilitation measures, improving port operations, and enhancing cargo handling capacity. In addition, it's very important to strengthen the coordination among border agencies. So without taking too long, ladies and gentlemen, let me give the floor to my colleague Jan so that he can give us a very detailed presentation on this subject. Over to you, Jan, if you can hear me.
A wonderful good afternoon from Geneva. Thank you so much for this opportunity, for organizing this. Really a great initiative, exciting times. Let me, as discussed, start sharing screen. You should now be seeing a PowerPoint presentation on the impact of shipping disruptions trade in Africa. If anything does not work, please shout, because I don't see you right now. I'm seeing my shared screen. So the impact of shipping disruption on trade in Africa, I've structured it into three parts. What happened? Some hard data. What are the implications? Some analysis from UNCTAD. And actually only one last slide with 3 points. What could we do? Because what we could do would normally require days and years of projects and works and analysis, but just 3 foods for thought. And it's really, and it's a spoiler here, spoiler alert. It's not much we can do, but it's very long-term what we need to invest. So what happened? Let's start with the first question. Here's the chart of what has been so much in the news. Well, what has been the news is above all the red line. This is the decline of transits in the Suez Canal. I do want to point out here what has been a little less in the news, but it's also important, the decline of transits in the Panama Canal for different reasons. In Panama, it is really it's caused basically by climate change. There's not enough fresh water, and that has reduced the capacity of the Panama Canal. So that is what happened. There's one nice way to illustrate this with a little movie, thanks to our partners in Marine Benchmark who produced this video for us. So here what you see at this moment is a standing picture of the big container ships. This is large container vessels of 13,000 TEU, 20-foot containers and above, going through Suez. So here we start, it looks like little ants on the street. And then at some point in time, we will see that these little ants change their route. And far fewer go through the Suez Canal, and many, many more on their way between Asia and Europe, but also between Asia and the east coast of North America, go via South Africa. And this is really the point, the question we could ask ourselves. Now that there are so many more ships going around South Africa, what does it mean? Are there opportunities? What could we think in the long term for Africa? But also, what does it mean for those African countries that depended on the Suez Canal, who now have to go a far, far longer way themselves? So what are the implications of what I've just shared with you? There are several. First, yes, we have higher distance and something that's not so much in the news, but that the first reaction of the shipping lines then, of course, also go faster. And if you go faster, as you know from yourself when you drive a car, you also emit more, you consume more. And if you have the combined effect of a larger distance between, for example, Singapore and Rotterdam via Suez, compared with the longer distance plus higher speed via South Africa, the emissions are up to 70% higher, 70% higher, more emissions. Another impact is that the global distance, that means also the demand for shipping services goes up. We have already seen over some years a global increase in demand for the distance of dry bulk. This is the brown line here. That includes iron ore going from Brazil to China, more than from Brazil to Europe, but also the increased distance that grain is traveling, for example, from the United States, Canada, or Brazil to Egypt, because there's less grain coming from Ukraine, or the blue line, which is the oil, which has also increased further because, for example, oil from Russia that used to go to Europe is now going to India and China. The red line is the one for container ships, which is really the most in the news. That used to be going down, and that went down because we had more and more trade within Asia, and that is shorter distance. But as you can see here now, the forecast for 23 and 24, based on what is happening, is also there an increase of distance. If you have more distance traveled, it means you need more ships for the same volume of trade. And if you do not have more ships for the same volume of trade, freight rates go up. We won't go into the detail of what happened during COVID, would be another fascinating topic. You see here the red line are the freight rates, the blue line is what shipping lines like Maersk, MSC, COSCO, what they pay to charter ships. That went even up, even more actually. And you see the red line and blue line, they have been going up again, but not as bad as it was during the COVID pandemic and the supply chain crisis. No? So this means higher freight rate. Paul Hansen is in the room. He will be happy that I share the example. He kindly gave it to me. A real case, Kenya tea exports, for example. So you can translate the higher freight rates here before and after 2,442 increases to 6,513, and this translates to higher prices, costs for the tea exported. So higher freight rates. Who is mostly impacted among the African countries or in the region? I've included Saudi Arabia here. So which are the countries that most depend on the Suez Canal? And you see that almost 1/3 of the foreign trade, and here I have volume. I have to say it is tons. We don't have value in dollars. In dollars, it would probably be a little less because high valued goods may be exported more by air transport. But it's about 1/3 of foreign trade of Sudan, Yemen, Djibouti goes normally through the Suez Canal. So these countries are definitely negatively impacted. I started out with this little video, and another way to show this picture, maybe less intuitive, is the schedules, the timetables of the shipping lines. And you can see here how there has already been a shift between Europe and Mediterranean to the Gulf region and Far East. This has gone down relatively, while the one from the only Far East has increased. It is where the ships are deployed. And the ones that include Sub-Saharan Africa have the orange one, the third one. You see the third one from the left. The ones that include Sub-Saharan Africa have increased. So do we have more opportunities here to benefit, to provide services? And that's an interesting question. One could assume, yes, there are now more transport, more ships coming to Africa. And here, if you see this line, the green line here is the container ships. So I just need to, the number of ships that arrive in the Cape of Good Hope. That's South Africa, but I believe it also includes, I'm not sure. I think that's really only Southern African ports here. So yes, you have normally, like on a typical week, this is weekly data, 5, 6 ships, and now all of a sudden they're up to 20 ships. So that sounds like good. But what do these ships want? Do they want to load and unload cargo? Remember, these are very, very big ships. They actually just want bunker, maybe repair, maybe a stopover for some other reason. And although this sounds like an increase, if I compare this, now I have the same green line. I keep the green line is the same as before, but I compare to the number of ships that go around South Africa without stopping. And you see, this is much, much, much more. So on the one hand, I could say, look, the green line is going up, that's good. But on the other hand, I see, wow, so many ships pass by and we are not selling any bunker services. We are not loading, unloading cargo. Most ships pass by. And there's really not so much we can do about it. You saw that ships had increased their speed. They wanted to go faster, to compensate for the longer distance. I'm looking at my watch and I realize I promised less than 10 minutes. So what could we do? And as I started at the outset with a spoiler alert, there's not that much that we can do in Africa, but there's a lot we can do in the long term. It's this crisis and opportunity is, I believe, a reminder of many of the things we have been working on in any case for, I would say, decades. So first, to reduce shipping costs. There are many things we cannot do anything about. We cannot do anything about the distance or about global market rates or the global fuel price. But we can do something about port reform, trade station, transit, competition. If you are an exporter in one, say you are an exporter in Benin, in practice, you will most likely have to import or export through Cotonou, because the trade and transit facilitation to go through neighboring ports, you maybe want to go through Tema or through ports in Nigeria or Togo. The trade and transit facilitation is not as good as in Europe. And if you allow me 15 seconds here, in Europe, the biggest port for German cargo is actually Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The biggest port for Polish cargo is Hamburg in Germany. The biggest port for French cargo is Antwerp in Belgium. And the biggest port, the largest volume of containers for Norwegian cargo is Gothenburg in Sweden. What I'm trying to say, we have a lot of inter-port competition, a lot of choice that is good for the trade competitiveness of European importers and exporters. And we do hope that with the African Continental Free Trade Area, with more trade and transit facilitation, we will also have more inter-port competition in Africa. The second is generally, when you look at the dependency, so some countries depend a lot on the canal. We have a very nice program on resilience building. Lots of things can be said here, but diversification, intra-regional integration are among the solutions that can overall reduce our vulnerability, our dependence on a few providers, on a few trade routes. And last but not least, long-term, the biggest challenge of shipping over the next decades is the energy transition. It is the decarbonization of shipping. This has cost implications, but it also provides opportunities, including for African countries, to become providers of alternative fuels. And if ships may or may not pass, but if you motivate them to pass by your countries and you provide alternative fuels, this would be a long-term opportunity and growth potential also for African countries. Some further information here where we try to help you with the trade and the trade logistics branch. The assessment on which some of the charts are built is here, the rapid assessment, navigated troubled waters, and recent articles by colleagues, Celine and Jean-Marc, Red Sea crisis implications for trade station Africa, some further reasons, and I stop here and am ready for any questions and corrections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. Thank you for the very nice presentation and very informative presentation. Maybe before we go to the question and answers, let us hear from the panelists we have, because we have a panel, and then we will open up the floor for the questions, including questions on the presentation, as well as questions to the panelists. So let me invite my colleague Judith to moderate this session. Judith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Diane.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Jan, for that presentation. And as Diane said, we will open the floor for questions and comments a little bit later on. And in the meantime, you're also welcome to drop any comments and questions in the chat box. But for now, let's get straight into the panel discussion. And I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panelists. First, we have Colonel Andrew Sizot. He is the Secretary General for the Ports Management Association of East and Southern Africa. He is also the immediate Executive Secretary of the Pan-African Association for Port Corporation. He was appointed Secretary General in 2018. He has extensive experience in maritime and port sector, arising from his tenure as CEO of the Seychelles Ports Authority. One of his tasks as the CEO of the Ports Authority was working closely with the Blue Economy Department with a view to coordinating, consolidating, and prioritizing national initiatives geared towards harnessing opportunities and resources from the oceans in a sustainable manner. He is a former board member of the association and one time chaired the communications committee. Before that, he served in the Seychelles People's Defense Force and was tasked to lead the development of the Seychelles Coast Guard, which complemented maritime security deployment around the Indian Ocean of the Seychelles archipelago. You're welcome, Colonel Risso. I hope you are connected. Our next panelist is Mr. Robert Lisinge. He is the Chief for Energy Infrastructure and Services Section at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. The division under which he works focuses on crowding in private sector investment in African countries, particularly in the area of infrastructure. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering and a Master of Science degree in Transportation Engineering. He also holds a Master of Philosophy and a degree in of Doctor of Business Administration from Maastricht School of Management in the Netherlands. Prior to his current position, he was the chief of the Operational Quality Section and Strategic Planning at UNECA. He has over 15 years of experience in undertaking research and advising African governments and organizations on infrastructure policy, as well as transport and trade facilitation issues. We also have Ms. Sheila Mashiri. She is the Managing Director at Allen, Watt and Shepherd Global Freight. She has over 30 years of customs experience. She is a revenue specialist and a freight forwarder. And she's also the Vice President of Infriata. You're welcome, Ms. Mashiri. We also have Mr. Washington Dube, who is the CEO of Zimbabwe Shipping and Freight Forwarding Agents Association. He is a former trainer for the Department of Customs and Excise. Welcome, Mr. Dube. And finally, we have Captain Muhammad Musa. He is an experienced former maritime pilot and currently serves as the General Manager of the Harbour Master's Office at Djibouti Ports and Free Zones Authority, overseeing vessel reception and all assistance services provided by various port facilities. He has more than 40 years experience in the maritime sector. And I'll start with Captain Muhammad. We saw in the presentation that Djibouti is one of the countries that is most impacted by the disruptions in the Suez Canal. Given your lengthy maritime experience, how specifically have these disruptions affected trade from the perspective of Djibouti Ports and Free Zones Authority? Over to you, Captain Muhammad.
Good afternoon, Madam. Thank you very much. I hope everybody hear me. Djibouti Port is at the entrance of Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. And this issue of instability of Red Sea is, of course, affecting the trade in our different port facilities. We have approximately 4 or 5 different port facilities: oil terminal, container terminal, multi-purpose, and also in another multi-purpose in the north of Djibouti. So in terms of trade and in terms of ships call, we are still a little bit more than what we are realizing in 1 year ago. For example, March 2024, 156 ships called Djibouti. Comparison of 1 year ago is almost 5 ships more. In terms of volume, and especially containers, because we have one of the best container terminal in Africa, and we operate approximately 110,000 boxes in March. So that's mean the comparison of the other. And 1 year ago is completely more than 40% more than last year. The reason is that we are at the gate. Like I saw that presentation a few minutes ago, a lot of ships, for safety reasons, are not trading through Red Sea. So they are dropping containers in Djibouti, and then feeders vessels are making transshipment from Djibouti to Hodeidah, Yemen, to Jeddah, to Sudan, up to Egypt. So that's the reason the trade and in terms of operational boxes, we are a little bit more than what we were doing 1 year ago. In terms of security, this is also very big challenge for us, for our Djibouti Navy, for our Coast Guards. I think you know that almost every maybe 2-3 days, there is an attack to a vessel passing through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. So we are always welcoming those vessels who's trying to avoid those attacks, coming to Djibouti, waiting restriction, waiting maybe in insurance coverage sometimes. And then sometimes they're waiting 4 or 5 days at the anchorage until they have a lot of protection. So even sometimes they have also protection from Navy vessels, a coalition from Americans, French. So they're waiting protections to pass through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, or sometimes to pass through the Gulf of Aden to go to Indian Ocean. So for us, we are, I think, on the eye of cyclone. Djibouti is a very stable country, very stable seaports, and around us, you can imagine what's happening every day. I think you are following the news. There is always a case, but those vessels are coming to Djibouti. Protections, sometimes they are also doing some repairs and before going to the next destination. That's approximately how Djibouti is dealing, but we are always 24 hours standing by to assist those vessels who's coming to our territorial waters.
Thank you very much, Captain Mohammed, for highlighting the operations challenges and some of the opportunities that Djibouti, and specifically the ports, has engaged in and how it operates. I'd like to move to Ms. Mashiri, and I'd also like to get your input on, from a shipper's perspective, from a shippers and freight forwarders perspective, how have the disruptions in the shipping affected trade in Zimbabwe specifically? Over to you, Ms. Mashiri.
Okay. Zimbabwe has had their fair share regarding disruptions from what has been highlighted there by Mr. Hoffman, because we are sort of a hinterland that connects into either Beira, which is in Mozambique, or Durban, which is in South Africa. So a whole lot of these disruptions means in total, there is more waiting time, there is more charges that are incurred by the importers in Zimbabwe or even the shippers. So at the end of the day, we are at the end of that whole trading line where for even the calculation of the duties is now based on the costs that are incurred at the ports. So where ordinarily if a consignment would have landed some 30 days ago without all these disruptions, there will be quite an increase because there's an added cost, and that cost goes to the importer. So at the end of the day, because it's a whole of a supply chain, the consumer ends up then having to bear the brunt of that particular disruption. And a whole lot of it, you will see it in the fuels, where now the cost of even importing the fuels that come to Zimbabwe are now at a more rate than the normal. So once your fuel, which is a key factor in your industry, goes up, it all is like just a cycle that goes on and on and on. So shippers and freight forwarders had to bear that brunt of, one, long waiting times, two, costs that are forever increasing. And the one other peculiar is some of our commodities are based on what we call permits. And some permits are only governed for a duration of time. So in the event of grain coming out of maybe Ukraine, if you have a permit that says it must land in Zimbabwe within 60 days, So the more time that you now have incurred, it means you're starting the process all over again to do with the agriculture permits, the phytosanitary permits, and that also entails a more waiting time on the importer. And while you are also waiting, it's more demurrages that you are incurring from the shipping line, from the transporters, from the bonded warehouses where probably an importer or a shipper has said, okay, they will move it in transit to a holding yard. But the more that you're holding that particular cargo, it means there is more and more costs that one has to incur. So those disruptions had quite an impact on countries such as Zimbabwe because our reliance on port activities that probably we do not have much say on, because if it is demurrage, this shipping line will say what they want to charge. If it is transport, the transporter then decides how much they're going to charge you. But at the end of the day, you are on the receiving end because you are needing to link the commodity to the customer. I submit.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mashiri, for breaking down some of the impacts that you're facing in Zimbabwe, and I think they mirror what Jan had put in the presentation. You mentioned something about Zimbabwe being the hinterland that connects some of the more inland ports, and I will come back to that later with a question for Mr. Dube. But Kono Sizo, my apologies. Global maritime trends show that the shipping sector's resilience despite major challenges stemming from global crisis. Is this trend reflective of what is happening in the East and Southern Africa region? Kanorizo, are you there? Sizo? Do we have anybody connected from the Ports and Management Association of East and Southern Africa? Okay. I will move then to Mr. Lisinge. We've seen some of the opportunities that have come from the disruptions in the port, particularly rerouting through the Southern African ports. So that shows that there's increased activity in some of these ports. And if these disruptions persist in the medium to long term, is the existing shipping infrastructure resilient enough to accommodate such prolonged disruptions?
Muted. Okay, hope you can hear me now. Thank you so much, Judith. And let me also congratulate UNCTAD for the 6th anniversary in advance, and thank my friend Jan for the excellent presentation as usual. I would like to start answering this question by touching a little bit on the imperatives for port infrastructure development in Africa. One, I think ports are critical to the economy of African countries, particularly for some countries like Djibouti, and I think that the contribution to the GDP is pretty high in this country. Other countries like Ethiopia that are landlocked, dependent on the port of Djibouti for 95% of its exports and imports. So ports are critical for the development of African countries, even before the crisis that we are talking about. The second imperative I want to talk about is the African continental free trade area. And in this regard, many people don't talk enough about this, but even today, or even before the CFTA, AFCFTA, more than 20% of intra-African trade was by sea. And that makes sense because close to 40% of African countries are coastal countries. And now the analysis that we have done at ECA shows that if we fully implement the Continental Free Trade Area by 2030, this share of intra-African trade by sea would even increase, which means that we will need infrastructure to handle this increase in intra-African trade. We've also simulated the number of maritime vessels that you would require if AFCFTA is implemented. So over 120 vessels for bulk cargo and many more for container. So we do need infrastructure, port infrastructure on the continent, even before this crisis. But let me also say that where we are seeing the bulk of demand for increased maritime transport in Africa is within North Africa and between North and East Africa. And coincidentally, this is the region that is affected by the current crisis in the Red Sea. And so this can have a direct implication on the African Continental Free Trade Area if this crisis in the Red Sea region is not addressed. Now, let me say that there were challenges already in the infrastructure of African ports even before the crisis started. Insufficient container storage space is what we all know. I think we also have low performance of inland transport modes, railway, roads, and so on. Obsolete port handling equipment. I'm listing all of these things because these are the things that will affect whether or not the infrastructure that we have on our ports will be able to take advantage of increased traffic as a result of this crisis. We also see that the equipment are obsolete. Energy crisis in countries like South Africa is impacting on the ability to take advantage of increased traffic. I think also there are issues related to IT systems, digitalization, safety, security, and environmental protection. So having said that, it is clear that even before the opportunities that have arisen came, we were having challenges with infrastructure on our port. And what are we seeing right now? We see that because of the traffic that has been diverted through the Cape of Good Hope, which Jan showed us, there have been challenges in South Africa, for instance, in the port of Durban, I think Cape Town as well, to take advantage of this increased traffic that is coming for bunkering services. I think issues related to congestions have been reported, inefficiency has been reported. Also, the issue of that I mentioned of shortages, blackout, has been identified as some of the constraints that hamper the ability to take advantage of increase. So I think in a nutshell, the answer to your question is that if we see more traffic as a result of sustained or continuous challenges in the Red Sea area, it goes without saying that our ports would be unlikely to handle, except we do quite a lot to increase the efficiency of managing the existing infrastructure. And also, I think there's a potential for this new opportunity to generate new trade routes in Africa, because if ships are coming to our ports, it may generate new trade opportunities, and it becomes even more difficult if you add what we expect as a result of Continental Free Trade Area for our ports to handle this traffic. So what this points to is that there's a need for serious investment in infrastructure, in digitalization, in port handling equipment. Otherwise, it seems we are not well placed to take advantage of the increased traffic from an infrastructure perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. So the takeaway here is that with more traffic, our ports are very unlikely to be able to handle this traffic, and we need serious investment in infrastructure, port handling equipment, digitalization, and so on. There is a comment in the chat box, and I'll just read it out. This is from Suresh Kumar. I think it's time for the world to support and build cross-border transportation corridors across the continent of Africa, linking West and East coasts, as well as the Middle East via the North. So what steps are the UN plan to implement in the upcoming years? The world needs to invest more in African countries, especially in infrastructure, for the huge sake of global trade and the economy. And we'll come back to that, Suresh. And I'd just like to pivot over to Captain Mohammed, because Djibouti is one of the countries that has invested heavily in modernizing its ports as well as transport infrastructure. So Captain Mohammed, how have these investments benefited the country in light of the shipping disruptions? Over to you, Captain Mohammed.
So, can you hear me now? You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yes, you are right. The people of Djibouti put a lot of investment financing to our ports, new ports, and also to rehabilitate the previous in the old ports. What we have today in Djibouti, we have a container terminal with 18 meters depth. We have also a multi-purpose with 15 meters depth. All those facilities can accommodate the existing vessels trading on this area. And I'm also adding the oil terminal. The oil terminal also is 21 meters depth. Why we put a lot of effort and a lot of finance to our ports, new ports, is we have in the gateway of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the biggest country in Africa in terms of population, almost 120 million population, and also is a very developing country, a lot of business, a lot of trade. So we are number one serving that country, but also we are also serving countries around Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, like Somalia. A lot of business, a lot of trade with Somalia. We have also a lot of trade, a lot of business in terms of shipping with Yemen. You know that Yemen, the last few 8-9 years, is an unstable country. So a lot of containers, a lot of bulk cargo, a lot of general cargo are discharged in Djibouti and then loaded to a small vessel to send to Aden, to Hodeida, to Mocha. And it's also, we are also sending a lot of cargo to the quality. Somalia, south of Somalia, up to Mogadishu. So that's why those investments in our ports, the last, let's say, since 2006 to now, is in developing the trade in our region. I think we are the only country in the region who have dedicated terminals. If you go to Aden, you have one port. If you go to Berbera, you have one port. If you go to Mogadishu, you have one port. Go to Bosaso, you have one port. But Djibouti have dedicated. We said that we have different terminals dedicated for oil terminal, container terminal, multi-purpose. That's how we said that maybe it would be more easier to cut costs when you are operating with only one commodity. Containers, general cargo, oils, bulks. We are approximately doing annually 1.6 million tons of fertilizer for Ethiopia. That's why we put a lot of effort and a lot of finance, a lot of almost billions of dollars to develop those dedicated terminals. Each terminal have a commodity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Captain Muhammad. So we see that the investment in the ports and infrastructure is paying off for Djibouti through the increased operations of the ports and developing trade within the region. Earlier in the discussion, Ms. Mashiri mentioned that Zimbabwe provides hinterland connectivity for some of the ports that are further inland. I'd like to go to Mr. Dube. So hinterland connectivity is indeed an important element in improving access and connectivity of land-linked countries. What is your experience with hinterland facilitating measures such as dry ports or corridors and transit regimes? Are they really game-changing elements for connectivity of land-linked countries? Over to you, Mr. Dube.
Thank you very much, Judith. Maybe before I go to your question, Judith, I just wanted to comment that, last year, I think 2 weeks ago, we had some unprecedented situation in Dubai where there was rain, which has not been received, the highest rains received in 75 years. Which caused quite a lot of disruptions. I was also thinking that, as we are moving forward, incidents like the one which happened in Dubai, because of climate change, because of global warming, they are coming to the fore more and more, and they are actually affecting the way us as shippers, as clearing agents, how we do business. So, moving forward, Judith and distinguished guest, the issue of climate change, the issues of global warming, they become so important or so pertinent in our planning as we are looking at, as we are crafting maybe new corridors to facilitate the movement of goods. Those events, I was thinking, the highest rainfall recorded in 75 years, records, as we are going forward, will continue to be broken in terms of these disturbing issues which prevent the swift movement of goods. I just wanted to comment that my apologies, Judith, for digressing a bit. Going on to your question, interland connectivity, as Sheila has said earlier, she spoke about Zimbabwe being a part or a crucial part in the hinterland connectivity for countries along the Beira corridor, and also for countries along the north to south corridor. Maybe just to give the audience a clear picture, Zimbabwe, as it has been said, we are land linked. We do not have a port, so we rely on other countries. The majority, the most important being Mozambique with the Beira port, and also our neighbors, South Africa with the Durban port, and to some extent, Walvis Bay and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. So those are our ports of influence pertaining imports and exports going in and out of Zim. We also serve as a major transit route for countries like Zambia, for cargo coming through Beira or Durban, and also we also service to some extent DRC. So you find that land-linked countries, because of their location or because of the absence of a port, they rely so much on neighboring countries for their imports, for their exports. And because of that, the fact being that we do not have a direct, or land-linked countries, they do not have a direct control on what is happening on other nations. If a barrier is located in a neighboring countries, there is really little which we can do in order to maybe in order to alleviate that situation. So there are some interland connectivity measures which have been proposed and which are in place. Allow me, dear colleagues, to talk about the corridors. A corridor is a trade facilitation measure which links goods, the point of offloading. In this case, maybe it may be a port, up to the destination where the goods are destined to go. Maybe, for example, goods may be coming from Beira, going all the way to Zambia. So they will pass through Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and also Zimbabwe then to Zambia. So that's the Beira corridor. So a corridor is that dedicated space for the movement of goods to where the goods are, to a destination where the goods are going. But in terms of Southern Africa, the issue of corridors, they've not been a success. Why do I say this? A corridor is not an isolated. It's not an isolated transport system. It's something which should be interlinked between different nations. For example, like the example I gave, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. You find the corridors which we have at the moment, Judith, they are not linked. Why I say they are not linked, there is no corridor management authority. We cannot have a trade corridor without a corridor management authority to oversee the smooth movement of goods in that corridor. So you find at the moment, the corridors, they are distinct silos. We have the silo, the Mozambique corridor silo, the Zimbabwe silo, and the Zambia silo. So there is no that interconnectivity to smoothen the movement of goods in that corridor. Same as the north to south corridor. There is really not much in place to harmonize the movement of goods, to harmonize in terms of legislation, in terms of requirements from corridor to corridor. So you find the corridors we have in place, when you come to a certain border post, there are different laws which apply to the same consignment. So you find that interland connectivity is broken, or is not as smooth as we would want it to be as we are moving forward. So you also find that goods, interland connectivity, it has a lot to do with transit. So the goods will be in transit going to their final destination. But in terms of the experience which we have, at least in Southern Africa, it's not as smooth as we would want it to be in terms of the transit system, in terms of harmonization of customs and other applicable laws pertaining to the movement of goods. I just want to give example, Judith, if I may, in terms of a guarantee system. If you may be aware that goods, when they are moving within, they are transiting, going to a final destination in another country, they need a guarantee system to make sure that the duty at stake is secured. In other words, but you find, because there is no coordination, for example, if goods are coming from Mozambique, going all the way to DRC, what it means, you need to get a guarantee system in Mozambique, you need to get a guarantee system in Zimbabwe, you need to get a guarantee system in Zambia, up to DRC. So there is not that single window of opportunity, that you can obtain one guarantee system along a corridor. So those are the dynamics which we are facing as transporters, as shippers, as clearing agents, that those interland connectivity is not as smooth as we would want it to be. There is no harmonization, if I may say, of customs law, or no recognition or no mutual recognition of customs processes done in a member state. It would be helpful, our colleagues, to if I submit that, we may have a swifter and smoother movement if customs could recognize custom procedures done in another nation. So that has not been done, and all this, it adds to the cost of the imports, it adds to the cost of exports. So you find, in general, land-linked countries, their transport costs are generally higher. In some percentages, they go even up to 50% than those countries which are within access to a seaport. So it affects the competitiveness of land-linked countries, and then tying it all together to the Africa Free Continental Trade Area Agreement. Those countries tend to be less competitiveness. The issue of, if I may just to finish it off, Judith, if you allow me, the issue of dry ports, this issue is not taken root per se, especially from where we are standing as Zimbabwe, because of a myriad of challenges. The issue being the concept of a dry port, when it wanted to be implemented in Zimbabwe, it was not to our knowledge, it was not really a dry port, but an extension of a border post, where customs clearance just moved to an inland port. So that one is not really taken on board. But you find that Zimbabwe is a very prime, because of their location, is a very prime location for a dry port to service the hinterland nations, like connectivity nations like our Zambia and our DRC, because of our proximity to the ports of Beira. It's around 500 kilometers. The port of Durban, around 1,400 kilometers. The goods come nearer, so that DRC Zambia need not to go to Beira, need not go to Durban to collect their goods. They will just use the dry port in Zimbabwe. I submit for now, Judith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dube, for sharing those dynamics of hinterland connectivity. And I think it's clear that from the perspective of Zimbabwe, Shipping and Freight Forwarders Association, it's not operating as smoothly as we would have hoped. And you also specified some interventions to address this. Right at the top of your presentation, you raised the issue of climate change. And from Jan's presentation, we're already seeing that issues of climate change and global warming, that there are more emissions. I believe he mentioned up to 70% higher than what was happening previously. And so this brings into question the issue of an energy transition. I'd like to go to Mr. Lisinge right now. One of the complexities of the energy transition in the shipping industry is who is responsible for what. So with whom does the responsibility lie to drive this energy transition within the shipping industry? And what role can some of the key stakeholders play in the transition? Mr. Lisinge.
Okay, thank you, Julie, for that question. I see a number of levels of potential stakeholders in addressing this issue, especially from an African context. I think it all starts at the regional or continental level, where you have the African Union. And as you know, we do have the Common African Position for just energy transition. I think that gives the broad strokes on where Africa should be going. I think the starting point is that not acceptable that more than 600 million people on the continent don't have access to electricity. So the idea is to do everything possible to make sure that we have universal access. And on top of that, if we were to have the continental free trade area, we also need sufficient energy to produce those goods that we want to trade between our countries. And so the African Continental Free Trade Area, the African Union, and the need for universal access is what is driving the just energy transition in Africa. So basically, we are saying that we need to use the different sources of energy. Obviously, the target or the goal is renewable energy, but that will be gradual. And for the time being, perhaps gas could be used as well as a transition fuel. Now, if you go to what I'm saying, this is the continental policy is cascading down to the regional level, where you have the regional economic communities. So, for instance, now we have SADC working, ECA working with SADC, trying to have a strategy, just energy transition strategy for SADC, which basically would provide guidelines in the use of different energy sources in that sub-region. And that will also have implication on what is happening at the national level, and hence what is happening at the ports. If you go to the national level, you already have countries, for instance, South Africa, that have a strategy on hydrogen. I'm going on hydrogen now because I know that it has a direct bearing on the shipping industry. ECA has been involved in looking at the state of play of hydrogen technology in Africa using a value chain approach. So how do you produce renewable energy? How do you use renewable energy to produce hydrogen from electrolysis? How do you transport the hydrogen that is produced, and how do you apply that hydrogen? I think that the shipping industry can be involved along the whole value chain. So if you are producing, if you're talking about production of renewables, it could be right at the port facility. You can have wind energy produced there. You can have solar energy produced there. Recently, I was in the port of Antwerp, and I saw that there was a whole industrial zone for chemical production there. And so if, for instance, hydrogen is produced at a port, then there could be storage facilities there. And it could also help countries to take advantage of global market in renewable energy. And that's why you see countries like South Africa, even Namibia, already going into mass production of hydrogen with partners in Europe, Germany, EU, for instance, with the whole idea being to produce hydrogen there. But because of their location at the coast and having good ports, those ports can be used as platform to transport the hydrogen that would be used or sold to markets elsewhere or in other continents. Now you have other players, or before I go to other players, the ports also have to use energy for their facilities, for their mobile equipment. They may have to, and I think Jan mentioned that one way to attract ships that don't just pass by is if you could provide sustainable fuel to them as well. But now, beyond the ports, you also have international organizations like IMO that set standards. I think the standard is to reduce CO2 by 50%. But you also have key actors like shipbuilders, because if you want to go green, ship owners may decide to buy ships that use alternative fuels, not fossil fuel. And so those who are manufacturing or building the ships have a role to play. But also those who own the ships, they decide which kind of ships they want to buy, the kind of fuel that those ships are using. So I think, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say, there are different layers of actors in the energy transition decision, starting from the continental level that sets the general guidelines, and it cascades down to the national level where the ports are located. But if I have 1 second, I would want to comment on the question of what is the international community, the UN, doing to support
Go ahead.
Africa to develop regional corridors for trade. I want to say that even before the international community comes, Africa has been strategizing on this. We have the Trans-African Highway Network, which is made up of 10 highways crisscrossing the continent from Cairo to Cape Town, from Dakar all the way to Djibouti, from Lagos to Mombasa. We also have what we call PIDA, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. Right now, I think we have 69 projects adopted by heads of state. These are cross-border projects. So those projects are there. They have been identified. And right now, I also know that the European Union, through the Global Gateway, has also identified some projects, cross-border projects again, that they want to support. And the UN is here, particularly to this morning, I was in a meeting to discuss the Lapset rail project. Lapset is the Lamu Port in Kenya to Ethiopia to South Sudan corridor. And there's a project, there's a railway project there that we are supporting to try to implement. So I thought I should at least respond to that comment because we are personally involved in that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. First for sort of breaking down the different categories of stakeholders and what each of them can do. And with regards to the ports and what the UN is doing, perhaps you could drop some of the links of this work in the chat box so that participants can have access to them later on and read in greater detail. Ms. Mashiri, Robert has spoken about the role of some of the different stakeholders in the just energy transition within the shipping sector. And our UNCTAD Maritime report also calls on regulatory bodies, industry leaders, and investments to take steps towards an energy transition within the sector. Speaking specifically about the shipping and freight forwarders, what role can they play in moving the shipping sector in Africa towards an energy transition? Over to you, Ms. Mashiri.
Thank you very much. Looking at it, you want a narrative, if it was in the medical industry, where you are shying the ends of the bridge sort of innuendo. You want a concerted effort coming from all the stakeholders, more so the freight forwarders and the shippers. And when I'm saying shippers, I'm also saying even the owners of the vessel that call into the African ports would want an effort where there is combined effort from owners of the vessel and the shippers and the forwarders in Africa to form even PPs where Africa is using its renewable energy resources that they have, and the owners of the vessel are using part of the money from the business that they get from Africa in order to come with that transitional way. Because in order for us to reduce our carbon footprint, it's not enough if the vessels comply, but you do not have anything that relates to that particular compliance of the vessel in the port. So you need compliance that's from source right through to delivery of the importer or the exporter. So I'm saying as a stakeholder, there should be a concerted effort to lay down policies. I know you have people like in Kenya that have undertaken the Paris Declaration. You have South Africa coming with all the Go Green and all that. But I'm saying the narrative should take another dimension, which is not only putting up proposals, but there should be more effort and there should be a follow-up from the governments, freight forwarders, industry players, captains of industry, where the government should actually give timelines so that even next year, this time, we should say, okay, with regard to Kenya, what is it that we have gotten from the time they undertook the declaration? With regard to South Africa, when they said go green, what is it that they have done? Because we have a whole lot of these multinational vessels calling into the ports, even if they themselves can go green, but it's not enough if Africa is left with all the abundant resources that they have. So there should be a concerted effort where the forwarders, where the shippers are actively seen, maybe even having to give reports on a so often basis to say, this is what we have done, this is what our policy is, and also there is that trade-off which is coming from everyone. I submit.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for this submission. And I think when you say a concerted effort by all stakeholders, I think this does not only mean within the shipping, among the shipping and freight forwarders. I think it also takes into account some of the other stakeholders that Robert mentioned. So we've come to the end of our panel discussion, and I'd like to thank Mr. Lisinge, Mr. Dube, Ms. Mashiri, and Captain Mohammed for all their interventions. I would like to open the floor now for comments and questions. I already see some in the chat box. I'll read one comment from Commander Mokele. The current disruptions indicate a need to de-risk the canal-based maritime trade routes by strengthening and investing in the Cape Sea route, not just as a short-term response to the Red Sea and Panama Canal crisis, but as a strategic endeavor. To do that, African maritime supply chain players need to speedily adopt well-coordinated transformative measures and to make routes competitive. There is another comment and question here from Sifo's iPhone. Sifo, if you're still online, I'd like to invite you and give you the floor to present this question. Sifo, are you still connected? Hello, Sifo, are you there? Okay, I'd like to open the floor now if there are any questions from the floor. Would anybody like to make a comment or raise a question either to the presenter or to any of the panelists?
Yes, ma'am, if I may.
Yes, please. I think this is Commander Mokele. Please go ahead.
Yes, Commander Mokele here.
Please introduce yourself and perhaps you could direct your question to a specific speaker. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm Commander Tsietsi Mokele on the Africa Oceans Council. We've been having engagements on the east and western part of the continent to look at what could be the immediate measures taken, because I think in the whole thing, there are two issues that I would like Mr. Yan to respond to. One is the fact that it does look like we're in this for quite some time. At the beginning, it looked like it's a short-term situation that we're in, but it's looking like we're moving deeper into the crisis. There's no end in sight. And therefore, shouldn't there be a set of short-term measures on the high impact areas or interventions? Because in our engagement, it's becoming very clear that many of them are not infrastructural. Some of them are improvements that can be obtained in the short term. For an example, availability and positioning of bunker services to service the passing trade and reduce the pressure on the ports. If you look at emergency repairs, for an example, and then you look at the handling capability by specific ports that are largely on the major route. I think we really need to adopt a set of what can be done today to bring upon improvements. I don't think international shipping can sustain this much longer without Africa coming to the party. So I wanted to ask that issue, that in the discussions, I feel that others are long-term being brought forward. It's not helpful. But the short-term ones are not being discussed sufficiently. Is there no way that we can aggregate and say, these are the measures of what can be done immediately to service the diverted traffic in order to alleviate the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commander Mokele. Is there any other question from the floor? Okay, I would like to invite Jean now to respond to Commander Mokele's question, short-term measures that we can take for now.
Yeah, thank you for this very valid question, which we have also asked ourselves here to what extent should we recommend investing in short-term business opportunities, and you mentioned especially bunker services and also maybe repair and other services that are provided to the ship, and then not so short-term or medium-term, if there are more ships calling, also see expanding import-export opportunities, improving transit facilitation, improving cargo handling capacities. Of course, it's very easy it would have been very easy for us to say somebody needs to invest. I confess that I'm too optimistic that I would put a lot of my personal money into such an endeavor, because if in 1 week or 2 months the traffic goes back to where it was before through Suez, then it takes time to build bunkering facilities. It takes time to build shipyard capacities to repair ships. That's why in my presentation, I really had focused on the more longer term things that will be useful in either situation. There will, by the same token that I hope that we will again use the Suez Canal as before in not too far away future. By the same token, there will be other situations, there will be other interruptions, there will be other reasons why ships pass by African ports, which they didn't use really. So I'm sorry, I don't have really much better answer there. If the dear moderator, UNCTAD colleague Judy, allows me 3 minutes on 3 other points that were made during the conversation. I was really listening and appreciating all the different practical case experiences. In the case of Djibouti, I really struck to me, it's a bit confirmation bias. I wanted to hear what I wanted to hear. But the point was again made that it's good if shippers have different choices, if there's more than just one terminal, and that can be through different ports within a country, through different terminals within a port. But also, I want to come back to this here to allowing one country's imports and exports go through a neighboring country's ports. And this is something where I really feel we need to put a lot of emphasis in African trade competitiveness. Second quick point, Robert, good to see you about the energy transition. I think we can, if I understood what you said correctly, some of what you said for me is the chicken and egg question. So the ships are waiting for the ports to be ready to provide the alternative fuels, and the ports are waiting for a signal that ships will actually come if I invest in the energy transition and alternative fuels. And all this in the broader context of the negotiations that take place at the IMO. I am happy to see that African countries are becoming more active, to see also what is in their interest in terms of making alternative fuels competitive through different measures, but also to ensure that we have a stable environment. This links to the whole topic here. We're talking about risk, about changes we didn't really foresee. The risk is poison for investment. So if we had a clear picture of what will be a carbon levy, if any, what will be the exact fuel standard, what will be the exact regulation at the IMO, I believe this would also help somewhat with the chicken and egg challenge that I saw with Robert's examples. We need the ports to invest, but the ports need the ships to then also come. And third quick point, several of the specific solutions problem that were described have to do with digital solutions, with trade facilitation, where we feel that during COVID, actually, there was a big push, and we had a project with ECA and other regional commissions to ensure connectivity also in times of COVID. A key message there was all these improved e-signatures, digital documents, pre-arrival processing, single windows, trade information portals. These help achieve both. They facilitate the life and trade of traders, but they also actually facilitate the tasks of government. So it's not like a trade-off, either I facilitate trade or I control, but really we have seen a boom, progress in digital solutions. And if you look at the latest UN survey, United Nations survey, where again UNCTAD and the regional commissions are partners, we do see improvements. So one could say in spite of COVID, or maybe because of COVID, we have seen improvements. And by the same token, maybe there's also a motivation now with this current crisis, which was the topic of this seminar, as a motivation to see actually it's not a bad thing to have good transparency, good visibility, good forecasts, and improve our planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan, for coming back and responding to some of those points on digital solutions in trade facilitation, investment in infrastructure, imports and shipping, and routing exports through other countries. We have about 6 minutes left before we close. I'd like to give one last opportunity if there's a burning question from the floor. I'd like to open for just 1 minute. Would anybody like to take the floor? Okay, I don't see any. So I'm not going to attempt to summarize all of this, but I would like to thank Jan for the presentation that you have made. Thank you very much. I hope it will be available to share with participants after this webinar. I would also like to thank our panelists, Captain Mohammed, Ms. Mashiri, Mr. Lisinge, and Mr. Dube for all your interventions during this webinar. Thank you so much. If there is material that you feel would be useful to share with participants, please do send it to us and we'll share it with the participants who've joined this webinar. Thank you very much. I'd like to hand over now to Ms. Diane Sayinzoga for her closing remarks. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Judith, for moderating the session, and thank you everyone for participating. And specifically, let me start by recognizing really and appreciating our panelists for sharing all your thoughts, your ideas on this subject. It was very useful for all of us who was following the discussions. And also thank you so much, Jan, for the very nice presentation you shared with the participants. I hope, as Judith mentioned, you are going to share the slide, and then we will share the slide with everyone who attended the session. So let me try to recap some of the key ideas or elements you mentioned. First of all, we saw like what happened briefly, and then what are the implications, including the high freight rates, including the rerouting as well as other opportunities. And then we look at what we can do. That was during the presentation where we saw that that there is a need to reduce the shipping costs by improving the performance of the ports, by increasing the trade facilitation interventions. And also there is a need to improve the resilience, the diversification, and the intra-regional trade. So we also really had very, very nice interventions from Djibouti port management, from specifically Mr. Mohammed, where you shared what is the current status on the Djibouti port, how are you dealing with the security-related issues by strengthening the security and making sure that the operations are happening smoothly. We also had experience from Zimbabwe, where currently all those issues affected the transport of the shipment process in general, either in terms of increasing the waiting time, where now they are waiting for more than 30 days. We also heard that in Zimbabwe, the cost also increased, and I believe it's the same for other many land-linked countries. Thank you so much, ECA, for sharing what you are currently doing in terms of addressing this issue. It was also very well noted that in terms of infrastructures, actually we have to increase investment in terms of port infrastructures, because with the IFCFTA, we are expecting the number of transaction and shipment to increase. So this is a very, very good news, though there are so many things we have to do in terms of making sure that we are leveraging on those opportunities of increasing shipments. So we also talked about existing issues. It was mentioned the energy, there is a need of improving the IT systems and infrastructures. So we really enjoy like hearing all those insights from experts and from people who are working on it on daily basis, especially from the private sector, the freight forwarders, and those who are working on daily basis at the ports. Finally, last but not least, we had also some key recommendations again regarding like coordinating effort between stakeholders. That is something very important. If we want to overcome these challenges, there is a very big need of coordinating all the efforts from stakeholders. There was also another recommendation related to energy transition, where the target is now in the shipping industry, the target is now to use energy, so which means also there is a need to increase energy production, and of course it requires a heavy investment. There is a last recommendation which was about recognition of customs procedures. It might be another challenge when the customs are not communicating between themselves. So it would be good that country really manage to harmonize their custom procedures and recognizing each other. If something is happening at point A, it can also be recognized in the point B. So just it was a summary of all the discussions held during this webinar. And once again, let me thank you so much, all of you, for joining the webinar and for sharing your ideas. This is a continuous discussion. In the coming days, we could also invite you to share again development, especially on this topic. We'll be happy to host you again. Before we close, may I request each one of you to put on your camera so that we take like a photo of the event. Could you please, so that our technical team can take a picture? Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a very nice evening. Those who are in Africa, in Addis, so have a very nice evening. And those who are still in the morning, have a very nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.